Eric Sprott, Rick Rule, and Keith Newmeyer are three successful resource investors coming together for one simple reason: to buy cheap assets from distressed companies and seize this once-in-a-decade opportunity to buy gold, silver, and other mineral projects for pennies on the dollar. First Mining Finance Corp., trading on the TSX Venture under FF, a recently launched venture with the sole purpose to acquire advanced stage natural resource projects, and starting on day one with 18 projects, management has already identified over 60 additional projects to acquire. Learn more about First Mining Finance at futuremoneytrends.com/investright.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. My name is Kenneth Amanduri, and we got a really interesting show for you today. We're going to be talking about water. As many of you are concerned about a falling U.S. dollar, hyperinflation, or just inflation in general, the Federal Reserve and the reckless government, you hear a lot about gold and precious metals and putting your money there. But we have a special guest today who's going to talk about the water commodity. My guest, and you'll recognize the last name because he's the son of Jim Rickards. His name is Scott Rickards, and he's the president and CEO and co-founder of Water Fund LLC. This is a firm dedicated to water risk management. And he's built the first water cost index, and he says that water could be the next big hot commodity. So we are going to talk about how water scarcity can be a benefit to your portfolio. So Scott, first of all, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Ken. Appreciate it.
Scott, I live in SoCal, as I was telling you a little bit before we hit record here, and we're in the middle of a historic drought. And they're saying that El Nino might actually come around and help us out here. And maybe you can share your thoughts on if you really think that'll be a significant impact to our local area. But water scarcity, how can this affect someone's portfolio?
Well, first of all, with respect to predicting the weather, Ken, I'm no better than anyone else at predicting the weather. So with respect to El Nino, I think California is so parched that generally speaking, it's going to, and even an El Nino is still not going to solve the longer term problem, which is really a population versus water resources problem. Bringing water from where it is plentiful to where it is scarce is a very expensive proposition, and that kind of gets you some of the investment opportunities because it's all related to how do I own water producing assets that will rise in value as water scarcity becomes a bigger and bigger problem, and for investors to position themselves in that way and to think about it that way is a good starting point.
Okay, so talking about water, I mean, we have the government just so injected into this utility, this need that people have. What should water be priced at with what's going on with the whole drought? And, certain areas have an abundance of water, other areas are parched, as you said. I mean, how does someone play the water game? I mean, it's in certain areas they have an abundance of water, and maybe water should be cheap where they are, and in other areas where there's a drought and maybe people shouldn't be living, it's also cheap. How does this whole dynamic play out for someone who wants to invest in it? And do you see water repricing itself over the years?
Well, you've hit on all of the difficulties of water as an asset class. Clearly, water's intuitive. We all need it. We all drink it. We all pay for it in some way through our water bill or through our, the food we buy at the store. So water is as intuitive as it gets as far as natural resources. But you've hit on all of the issues in terms of pricing and mispricing as to why water today it's hard to really call it a commodity because no one trades it. I can't go in the market and buy some or sell some. So is it really in a category alongside all those other commodities that are traded? No, but I would say that certainly doesn't make it less valuable, and it's probably even more valuable. I would argue than the whole energy complex. And the reason is it's more critical to growth. And that's how investors have to think about the asset class. And secondly, how do you then begin allocating capital to it? What are the opportunities? Typically, until now, it's really been an equity story, a technology story. Investors have had the opportunity to allocate to a few ETFs in the market, which are generally large cap tech stocks, companies like GE and Siemens. That, in my view, isn't really a pure play on the value of water. The value of water is something else, and it's rising a lot faster than whatever GE stock is doing. So that's what I want to be in if I'm an investor. I want to be in the actual value of the underlying resource. What's that worth, and how can I invest in that? As Californians well know, the price we pay in our water bill is not reflective of the actual value or the cost of producing that water. So what my company's done is we figured out what the actual production cost is, and then what's the differential between how little we pay and how much that actually is. And the answer is that gap is pretty big. So that's why the underpricing of water is really what's holding back the industry from bringing forward all the solutions that it has, but can't bring to market because the price isn't right. So I would advise investors to seek out those opportunities where the customer, whoever it may be, a mining company, an oil company, individual consumers, are paying the right price. And if you're invested in those projects, those assets, where the off-taker of the water is paying the right price, it's a fabulous investment. But most of the time, 90% of the time, we're talking about water assets where the price is not where it needs to be. It's below production cost. So that's what makes water a very difficult and complicated asset class, despite being one of the most intuitive things we all know about.
Yeah, it does seem like a complex thing to value, which is leading me to my next question. I'm just curious, how does the water cost index work? What exactly does it track, and how does an investor profit off of what the real price of water should be if it's all manipulated?
Great question. With respect to the index, we strip out all the subsidies. So in California, for example, there are huge interest subsidies on water utility debt. That's a freebie from the state of California. There, all over around the world, there are energy subsidies are the most common one, and we plug those back in to reflect an actual market rate for energy. So what we do is we count every dollar that's actually spent by the entity producing the water. So Metropolitan Water, in the case of LA, is the wholesaler. We measure everything that it costs to source and distribute the water, and then we throw back in the subsidies, whatever they may be, and however we're able to identify them. So we come up with what's basically the most accurate, the best estimate out there of the real dollar value of the water on a unit per unit basis. So that's how the index is calculated, and with respect to that's how we estimate all the costs. And then we also take into account, obviously, all the water that's delivered to customers. So if you have a water network that loses half of its water, we don't count the water that gets lost, because it doesn't do anybody any good to lose half your water. So if you're a utility that's very leaky, you're penalized in our index. So with respect to how do you then invest in that, the answer is we've screened out opportunities all over the world where the price that's being paid for the water meets or exceeds what our index says. So that's primarily led us to places like the Middle East, particularly places like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, places that highly value water. They don't have any of it, and they're able to pay the right price. And so those are great assets to be invested in. But as I said at the beginning, it's not obvious that's just looking at the water world, that's where you want to be. It took us a long time to figure out where those opportunities are. And I would say California Texas, other parts of the U.S. are becoming interesting as the value of water is becoming more apparent to people. So in other words, as the price begins to rise, we will see a lot more of those types of opportunities in the States. But as of now, we're not seeing it in the retail water space. We're seeing it more in industrial water, but less so at the retail level.
It's interesting. So you're looking around at different parts of the world for free market solutions to water. Now, are these areas that have a scarcity of water? And if so, how does something that's being depleted, how does an investor benefit from that? Obviously, there's a smaller supply of it, but eventually does it go away? I mean, at what point is there just the breaking point for, let's say, an area like Southern California? But what about these areas that you're talking about that are elsewhere? Are they areas that are also have a scarcity of water?
Right. A scarcity. If you're an investor, you want to screen your investment universe by identifying the places in the world where water is scarce. I'm in Canada today, and there's plenty of water up here. There's no scarcity. It's no need to make a bet on Canadian water. In other words, the price is probably not going to skyrocket anytime soon. But yeah, in places like the Middle East, in Texas and California, in the drier parts of South America, China, there are huge opportunities because there are major population centers that have run out of the local clean source of fresh water. And when that happens, by definition, your water gets more expensive because it's either coming from farther away or it has to be treated. Both of those processes involve significant additional cost, primarily because you're using a lot more energy. If you're treating the water or moving the water, it takes energy and that costs money. So that's why the value is going up in these major population centers where water is scarce, but it doesn't guarantee that the investment opportunity is there because the customers still have to be willing to pay for it. Cairo is very water stressed, but customers don't pay anything for it. So we don't see any investment opportunities there right now. Saudi Arabia, you have the same situation, but customers pay a high price. Therefore, there are a number of opportunities there. So that's how we screen our investment universe. And as I said, we're seeing more and more potential opportunities in the States in terms of owning water assets. And that's just how we look at it. Other people look at it in terms of how can I invest in the technology that's going to solve the water scarcity problem. We don't like technology as an investment just because the water sector in general is not that well capitalized. And until it is, I think the best technology out there is probably not going to find its market yet. So that's our macro view on water tech. So we like to stick to actual water producing assets, cash producing assets, and that's where we look in the investment universe.
Scott, I'd like to get your thoughts on desalination. Looking from a Californian's perspective, we got a ton of water, but it's in the form of ocean water. And in my mind, if things got bad enough, we could put a bunch of plants along the coast, and theoretically that could be make a dent in our solution. I know that's probably going to be some government program. I'm not sure if that's something that will be an opportunity for investors if the government is really involved in that. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on desalination. Do you think that's something that would be a viable solution for the drought issue here and around the world?
Absolutely, 100%. It is it's a natural solution for California, and it's not just me. You would get that recommendation from most of the major engineering firms around the world in water would make that very same suggestion, that California should be pursuing desal in a big way right now. And in fact, California hosted a major desal conference a couple of weeks ago. The entire desalination industry came to LA to discuss this, and unfortunately they all walked away very disappointed because it was clear that California does not have the political will to pursue this for environmental reasons. They don't want to kill fish or marine life by basically dumping the salt back in the ocean. That's what happens with desal, and that's a political decision California's made. In terms of the private sector getting involved, there are huge opportunities for the private sector. Where desalination has been most successful, as I said, in the Persian Gulf countries, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they are 98% reliant on desalination, and typically up to half of the capital comes from private investors. And in fact, our firm is, we don't do this in a large scale yet, but we do have investment interests in desalination and desal assets, and it's a great investment if you find the right opportunities. So I would be very interested, obviously, in pursuing that in California, but unfortunately the state is not there. The will is not there to move ahead.
How does water affect the economy, the U.S. economy? Is it a major industry here, or is it just something that is mostly just a government faction?
Good. Yeah, no, good question. So we have 50,000 utilities in the U.S., which is very unusual to be so fragmented. Most countries have a single ministry of water that sort of administers the water utility business for the whole country. We have 50,000. So that's one thing. They're all government owned for the most part. I think there's some large private water suppliers and water utility providers in the U.S., but they only make up about 10 to 15% of the utilities out there. So the vast majority of our water comes from publicly owned utilities that are not necessarily profit-seeking utilities, and that's why there's just a political. Again, it's water and politics are very intertwined. And it's a political decision in the U.S. to highly subsidize water. So that's why you don't see the innovation. You don't see California pursuing some brilliant solution to the water scarcity problem right now, because although the talent has come up with a lot of great ideas, the industry isn't at a point where it can accept and buy into those ideas. And that's just because this is a dinosaur industry in a lot of ways. It's sort of the opposite of the energy industry, where you get all of the best engineering talent, you get all of the best ideas, and you get all the capital. Water gets 1% of the capital investment that the energy sector gets. And I would argue, you asked about how important is it to the U.S. economy. Water is absolutely essential to growth. Major cities are very well aware of this. Las Vegas is acutely aware of this. They're investing, a couple $2 billion to lower the intake of, Lake Mead so they can get more water. So when you don't have it, it becomes absolutely essential to growth. But if you have it, you generally don't really think about it, and you don't value it. No, and that's really the problem. We don't have the right valuation metrics, the right data to think about water the way we think about other things like oil. So I think that's part of what our company does, and generally raising awareness about the value and importance of water to growth.
Now the value is relative, I would imagine, depending on where you are, because water is expensive to move. If you're in an area that has a lot of water, it should be cheap, and if you're in an area that is a desert, it should be more expensive. Would you mind commenting on the value of water and what it should be priced at based on your guys' research, in a drought-stricken area such as Southern California and Vegas?
Yeah, so it varies. As you said, it's water's local. It varies depending on where you are. Two cities 100 miles apart, depending on whether they have are adjacent to a river or something. They have completely different costs, and therefore their customers should be paying a completely different price. As it turns out, we all kind of pay the same very low price, and the costs are what vary dramatically. So yeah, I think you've hit on it, which is that in a place like LA, the cost of water, the value of water, we've measured in cubic meters to be about $3.20. That's pretty high. That's on par with Israel. It's on par with Jordan, some of the driest countries in the world, and that's not what California. That's not what people in LA are paying. Good example of something that would need to change in order to bring the investment and the innovation that that part of the country needs. A place like New York City, they have water flowing from the Catskill Mountains down a pipeline that was built 100 years ago, and it's been functioning perfectly that entire time. Is not in need of any repairs. They haven't had to spend a dime fixing any of that, and so New York is blessed with a brilliant freshwater supply system. The island of Manhattan is in good shape, even though it doesn't have any indigenous water resources. So it really depends on how your infrastructure was laid out originally, how well it transports water, and how and obviously your resource endowment.
Scott, if people want to reach out to you and learn more about you, where would they go and what would they find, and where could they go to invest in this new water cost index that you have?
So our company is Water Fund, and our website is worldswaterfund.com, and we have we have a number of different opportunities. One of which is called Blue Bonds. So as I said, we're very focused on water assets that are producing water, producing cash, and we have those opportunities on a selective basis open to investors. So we try to find as many as we can, as many good ones as we can, and that's where investors can learn more about it.
That's really good. And Scott, I really want to thank you for coming on the show with me today and having this conversation. It's a big issue, and people are concerned about inflation. And water is definitely something that is and should be inflation proof. So this is a really important conversation. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ken. Appreciate it.